Done. All right, a couple more. All right. To those of you just joining us, I have Jeanette Finicum on the line. She's actually driving home today. So pray for safe travels. Pray for no road closures. That's something I got a little experience with yesterday that was not as fun as it sounds. It was actually mildly inconvenient, but somehow life went on. I'm happy to say that I made it back. I was able to come to work. Life is good. All right, one more share and we are ready to roll. And this is it. Done. Okay.
Deep down, we all know that freedom and liberty matter. This is where we discuss why they matter. This is Loving Liberty with Bryan Hyde.
Hello there and welcome to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. Glad you could join me today. I'm without a producer. I guess today I am the chief cook and bottle washer, and it actually intimidates me a little bit. I really appreciate Mohammed. I appreciate Pat and the work that they do, but I'm bravely soldiering on. And I have Jeanette Finicum on the telephone with me. Speaking of bravely soldiering on, Jeanette is making her way back from Oregon. The trial for W Joseph Astaritah has concluded, and Jeanette, I'm just going to start out by asking, how are you today? I mean, now that the trial's come to an end, do you feel that somewhat of a burden has been lifted?
Yes, somewhat. And thank you for having me back on, Bryan. I really appreciate it. Yes, I'm in my car traveling back home so that I can move forward with my daughter's wedding, which I'm really excited about. But our family is grateful for the opportunity that we've had to be able to sat in that courtroom and listen to the testimonies of all of the different witnesses that were called, all the different officers and church team members. We feel that we have gained an incredible amount of information, and we are excited about moving forward with our wrongful death.
Well, for those who don't know, the verdict came back not guilty on all three counts, and I'm going to just admit it didn't surprise me terribly, because really the burden was all that the defense had to do was create a reasonable doubt as to whether Agent Astarita was lying or not, and it sounds like that reasonable doubt was created. But the bottom line is there are still gunshots that are unaccounted for, and that's a pretty chilling reality that has yet to be fully accounted for.
That's right. I think we're able to present reasonable doubt within the first couple of days. It was amazing. Those officers were sticking together in their testimony and raising the doubt that could be possible that they possibly fired those shots. So that was established early on, and we realized what the outcome was going to be. But however, we felt the need to continue to be there to gather the information that we needed. And you're right. The questions have not been answered. Nobody knows who fired those shots, and it's interesting to hear the jurors' take on it when interviewed by Maxine for the Oregonian. To read her article and to see what the jurors had to say, they're asking the same questions, and they realized that they were being lied to. But who is lying? Who is telling the truth? They could not determine that.
Well, and so people can understand that, hopefully those who know you or know of you recognize this is not just some quest for vengeance that, you're out to avenge Lavoie. This is a quest for accountability. Tell us, why does it matter that the government be held accountable for the way that it set those events in motion, set up the roadblock the way that the shots were fired. Why is it important that we know who made those calls and hold them accountable?
We need to hold our officials accountable. We need to know who's telling the truth and who's not. We need to have men and women in these positions that have integrity and value being honest. We need to be able to, as a public, trust our public servants. We need to be able to instill that trust back in the hearts and minds of the people. Because right now, we don't trust our law enforcement officers. We don't trust our FBI. Look what's going on in Washington. How do we change that? We have to have people in those positions that are above reproach, that have integrity and stand firm. We need to change the training that is out there. We are training these men and women to shoot first and ask questions later. And I think that's appalling. We need to have better training available, and we need to change the tone and tenor within these agencies that they presently hold. Because we are not the enemy. We, the American people, are not the enemy.
Amen. And I have to compliment you and others who have continued to take the moral high road as this latest trial has played out. I know I saw lots of anger when the verdicts were announced. I know that it was disappointing for some folks, but I have never seen you resort to hatred or vilification. Even Ammon Bundy had spoken up and had said, look, you got to remember that these guys were acting on training that trained them to see anybody who's not, in law enforcement as a potential enemy. And they were also going on bad information with buzzwords like domestic terrorists, militants, they'll never be taken alive, and so forth.
Exactly. They were brainwashed from the beginning. They were dealing with falsified threat assessments. Remember the Wooten letter? Remember the evidence that came out there? They were dealing with the same evidence that was down in the Bundy incident, because those are the same actors, Dan Love, Greg Bretting, that were dealing up in Malheur. So they were dealing with that information. And when these officers think that they're going into a situation where these men and women who are standing for their First and Second Amendment rights and property rights issues, and they think that they're going into harm's way, they're going to protect themselves. That's a natural instinct, is it not?
Absolutely. And it doesn't help that government at all levels has kind of co-opted the word hero. So if somebody wears a government uniform or they represent the state, we're supposed to automatically give them the benefit of the doubt. I noticed one of the jurors had made that comment. Well, I believe whatever the FBI is going to say, but it's the same jury foreman who was saying, but at the same time, somebody's got to be lying.
That's right. And I find that very interesting. He also said that he was quite frank on his juror questionnaire, and he felt that he was going to be dismissed because of how frank he was in reference to he automatically gives them the benefit of the doubt. And I raised the question because we were there the day that they were going over those questionnaires and interviewing these jurors, and the public was left out of that process. It was a sealed process. Even at the last minute, Maxine had to call the judge, the reporter for the court, had to call the judge to get, hey, why am I not in there? And when he realized that she hadn't been in that proceeding and to be able to speak about it, he let her in, but he didn't let anybody from the public in there to witness how they went about picking the jurors for this particular case. So I find that very interesting too. What was the process? What were the questions? How were they answered? What questions did they ask them once they got them in there? There is so much about this case that we do not have answers about. We still don't know who shot those shots, and I don't know that we'll ever know.
So what happens now? Obviously, you are on your way home. I know you have a lot of responsibilities waiting for you back at the ranch, but like a lot of people, I'm very anxious to see when that wrongful death suit begins to move forward. Last time you and I talked, I think you had indicated it could be as much as a year before that actually gets into motion.
Correct. We're in the dismissal phase because some of the defendants are going to want to try to have their dismissed, and so we'll be fighting those motions. And after that, we will be in discovery according to the judge that has set the scheduling. We're hoping to begin discovery after the first of the year, and we'll go from there. I don't see us going to trial until this time next year.
Well, in the meantime, I just hope that the truth continues to trickle out. It moves at a much slower pace than most of us would like. I'm impatient. I want this thing resolved and resolved satisfactorily in a hurry, but it takes time. And yet I'm confident that as the truth comes out, the right things are going to happen, like we saw in the Bunkerville case. And I just hope that you and your family can be strengthened and sustained through that time period, because it's got to seem like a lot longer for you.
It certainly does, and I am encouraged by the lovely people out there who continue to support our family and to encourage us in so many different ways that they offer their support, and I thank you for it. I thank you for continuing to tell our story.
Jeanette, is there anything that those who are listening who would like to help you, is there anything that our listeners can do between now and the time that wrongful death suit actually goes to trial to help ease your burden?
Well, there are a couple of things. If you're interested in following us and getting the updates, you can go to our website, and I put out a newsletter every couple of weeks. If you're interested in helping us financially, because this is a big burden and it will be costly, there is a legal aid button on our website that you're welcome to visit. Also, we have partnered with the Center for Self-Governance with a documentary, LaVoy, Dead Man Talking, where we are presenting episode 1 of 3 at this time. And if you're interested in hearing more about LaVoy and from himself, from his own lips, about who he was, what he was standing for, and why he went to Malheur, you can have us come to your area, and we'll be glad to show you the documentary.
Okay, you know I'm going to stay in touch with you. And Jeanette, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with me and with my listeners this afternoon. Safe travels, and God bless until the next time that we connect up.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. God bless.
All right, that was Jeanette Finicum. We will take a very quick break. When we come back, I've got a couple of other things to get you thinking. We're going to talk a little bit about, are we headed towards justice, or are we steering towards madness in America? That's a serious question. We'll examine it right after these messages.
The sun's finally out, so get out there and enjoy. And
Okie doke. By the way, for those of you who are watching the live stream, I don't want to sound too self-serving here, but if you can like and share this, or at least invite your friends to like Loving Liberty. I don't want to spill the beans, but we are about a month out from launching something that I think is going to be very groundbreaking and very needed in the current media environment, where it is really tough for people to get concise, truthful, and accurate news, immediately at their fingertips. I think we have something coming up that is just going to make a lot of you cheer. I'm excited for it. I don't want to overstate it. I know I'm being kind of elusive and secretive and not spilling my candy in the movie theater lobby here, but I can't believe how blessed I am to actually have a part and to be able to help with what is coming. But keep your, stay in touch with us. Follow us if you can. I'll try to keep things interesting so that you want to be a part of this. But great things are about a month out, and we have, I think we are going to meet a need that currently exists and is not being met by many of the mass media sources. And it is exciting beyond belief to see this come into shape. A lot of people working on it, a lot of incredible individuals who are very, very talented and just at the top of what they do. I'm in awe of where the universe has placed me at this point in my life, and the people that I'm getting to associate with, and that includes those of you that I meet through these broadcasts. Pretty incredible stuff. The best part of it though? Okay, since it's not on the air, I'm going to tell you this. This is the best part. I had to get my life kind of turned upside down in order for that to happen. The change had to come, and there had to be a lot of discomfort. I had to move out of the comfort zone in order for any of it to happen. So the lesson there is, when unexpected hurdles suddenly come up and you have to divert course, it's a blessing. Learning to see it as such is not always easy, but slowly I've been getting into that mindset, and it's It's a blessing disguised as a challenge. If you've been through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right. We'll be back here in about 30 seconds.
Answer is 100 million. In fact, 100 million pocket constitutions. Freedom Factor is a non-profit organization with a goal to distribute 100 million of these pocket constitutions. So far, they've distributed over 17 million. If you or your organization would like to be a part of this incredible effort, go to freedomfactor.org and learn how today. It makes a fantastic fundraiser activity. Go to freedomfactor.org and learn how.
Welcome back to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. Hey, lines are open at 801-254-1640. I've got a couple of topics. One I know is going to light a fire under some folks, and that's why I'm giving you the number right now, because when the urge hits, you may be seeing red, and if you have it in speed dial, or you can tell your phone to call Loving Liberty now, that'll help out. I was absolutely shocked. Well, this is the story I'm going to share in a few minutes about a medical abduction. And I want to start, though, with something a little bit broader, and it comes from an article that I saw on intellectualtakeout.org. This is from Jerome Worley, and it asks, does the arc of history bend towards justice or towards madness? And I want to just step back for just a moment here before we begin the article. Think about what justice used to mean. You kind of have a definition in your mind. I mean, just picture yourself. Someone comes up to you, this word, justice. So you say, well, what does this justice mean? How would you explain it to somebody who has never heard that word or maybe unfamiliar with the concept? See, in my mind, it's not that difficult of a thing to describe, because boiled down to its essence, justice is what is fair. If there has been harm done to someone or to their property, what is fair is that there is recompense that takes place. They are made whole insofar as they're able to be made whole. Fair enough? I mean, it's simplified. I'm not an attorney, okay? I can't pull on years of studying law books and all of the different arcane legal terms to describe it. But to my mind, it makes sense. It's what's fair. But if you mention justice in some circles today, there's a whole different slant to it. And I'm talking primarily social justice. Social justice is more about envy. It's not about what's fair. It's about you have something that I don't, or you stand for something that I don't like, and therefore justice is my capacity or ability to tear it down or to bring you low. And if I'm doing a disservice in how I'm describing this, feel free to correct me. 801-254-1640. Let's go to this article for a moment. When we talk about the arc of history, Jerome Worley says that arc of history is long, and sometimes it bends in very unproductive situations or very unproductive directions. For instance, in 1910, both Russia and Germany, they weren't perfect places, but they were pretty darn good places to be. Germany was definitely a first world country with some of the most brilliant minds that humanity had produced to that point. Living there, innovating, advancing. But by the time the 1930s and 40s rolled around, it was a pretty scary place. And the same thing for Russia. In 1910, before the Bolshevik Revolution, they had their problems, but generally, it was an amazing country with incredible resources, a very rich cultural history, and people weren't being killed off or starved by the tens of millions. Sorry, but that's just to put not too fine a point on it. The Holodomor was Russian communist dictator Joseph Stalin's genocide. That was a man-made famine in the Ukraine, 1932 to 1933. Which caused millions of Ukrainians to starve, even as the officials would confiscate their grain and confiscate their food. Of course, we know about the Holocaust in Europe, as it was perpetrated by Hitler and by his Third Reich. And why do we talk about them? Well, because they were top-rate countries. Or at least they had that potential. Something happened, though, and they veered into madness. Now, let's talk about America for a moment. Whoa, do you feel the defenses go up? Hey, This here's America. You don't talk about America in the same breath as, communist, Stalinist. But the truth of the matter is, even America has got some interesting challenges in its historical arc. The article says America as a whole has never been more prosperous, although this is not true of all regions within the U.S. But America's political and legal system has deteriorated for decades. The budget deficit is rising due to self-indulgent spending increases and excessive tax cuts. Civil liberties and basic civility, they're taking a beating. Protections for private property have waned. The Magna Carta recognized back in the 13th century that property rights extend beyond land by specifically protecting the people's personal property, like their corn. But federal judges often have ruled that the Constitution's taking clause affords less protection to personal than to real property, even though the text of the takings clause doesn't make that distinction. It says that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. Those are the actual words in the Constitution. One of the principal purposes of that takings clause was to curb armies from simply taking private property to supply soldiers during times of war. Personal properties like food and clothing were the primary targets of such seizures. Well, the protections against double jeopardy also have been on the wane. These were protections found not only in English common law, but going back to ancient Jewish law, Greek, and even Roman law. The Supreme Court has gutted many of those protections, which are found in the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment. It provides, quote, "Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life and limb." And the Supreme Court has disregarded such categorical language by creating what it calls the dual sovereignty loophole, which allows people to be retried in federal court for essentially the same offense for which they were found not guilty in state court. Lawmakers will take advantage of this loophole to pass federal laws duplicating state laws, and then federal prosecutors can go after people previously not found guilty in state court. That can lead to bankruptcy, even for a prosperous middle-class family, and very few people can afford to hire a legal defense team to defend them in 2 successive trials. Civility also is on the decline. It used to be understood that deliberately taking offense at people was a bad thing, and that publicly hounding them over it was an act of incivility. The great Renaissance thinker Erasmus, in his 1530 book on manners titled On Civility in Children, made this observation. He said, "If one of your comrades unknowingly gives offense, tell him so alone and say it kindly. That is civility." I mean, I'm thinking of like some of the demonstrations and counter demonstrations this weekend. When's the last time somebody used a little diplomacy in righting a wrong, whether perceived or real? That idea of take them aside and solve it, privately. I think that's really good advice. Years ago, I had a friend who, he and his wife were traveling back from a trip, and they lived in a small town in southern Utah. When I say small town, I mean like it had a 2 or 3 person police force. Well, as he's pulling into town late at night, he got pulled over for speeding by the sole police officer who was on duty. And he said, "Look, I was speeding." He goes, "We were close to home. We'd been driving for a long time. I was in a hurry." But he says, the dressing down that this officer gave me, and the idea that I'm out here protecting the public from people like you. And he just said, the guy made me feel like a total criminal. And what he asked was, he says, "I don't know what to say about this as far as," he goes, "I think it was totally wrong the way that officer reacted, but what do you think I should do?" And he was asking, should I go on the radio with you? Should I make this a public thing and kind of let people know, shame this officer if need be? And my advice to him was, you know what I would do? I'd go talk to the police chief. And I knew the police chief at that time, and I just said, if you could explain to him what you just explained to me, I bet you would find that it's better to solve this quietly and out of the public view, rather than let's make a big deal out of it and blow it up. And then, people get defensive, they dig their heels in and so forth. Well, that's exactly what he did. He went to the police chief, explained where he was coming from, and the chief, to his credit, said, "You know what? I see what you're talking about. You're not the first person who's approached me. And this was a rookie officer. He was fresh, out of the academy, and perhaps had, something to prove. Look, I'm competent at my job. I'm good at my job." And so he was looking for every little thing to show that nothing's going to get by me, or that I'm not a pushover. And the chief just simply pulled this officer aside and talked to him and said, "Look, you need to distinguish between when it's time to put on the big boy voice and when it isn't." And it was a correction that took place out of the public view, But the point is, it actually worked, and the problem didn't become bigger, and it didn't cause a divide or a rift in the community. So when it comes to approaching incivility, or let's try that again. When it comes to approaching a problem, incivility is probably going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. We'll come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this. I don't want you to miss out either on our story about medical abduction, because this one's going to blow your mind. We'll be back after this.
When the weather's hot outside,
All right.
cool off with a splash of K-Talk Media, 1640 AM. Oh yeah, now that's refreshing.
Hay muchos asuntos de inmigración en las noticias. Hay cambios rápidos que están pasando en la ley. Mi nombre es Alison Johnson y soy abogada con Peace Legal. Trabajo con individuos, familias y empleados en sus asuntos de inmigración. Ustedes tienen derechos y protecciones bajo la ley. No tengan miedo de ejercer sus derechos. Están allí para protegerles y ayudarles. Nuestro sitio de web es peacelegal.net. Tenemos 5 oficinas aquí en Utah, en Ogden, Salt Lake City, Sandy, Orem y Spanish Fork. Si usted desea hablar con un abogado de inmigración, favor de llamar 801-872-3.
So one of our listeners, one of our viewers on here, was pointing out that the banner behind me is flipped. And I've noticed that too, but since I'm left-handed, I kind of get this sick sense of pride, like, see what it's like, right-handed people, the world's set up different. Okay, I'll set that aside. I don't know how to flip the camera other than turn it, do the screen flip thing, but I kind of have to be able to see what's going on so I can see comments as they're coming in and so forth. So smarter people than me would already have that taken care of and done, but I'll look into how I can flip that around. And the guy who's pointing this out is probably one of the smartest people I know computer-wise. So it's like I really wish I knew how to do that off the top of my head, but I don't. If anybody wants to share their wisdom with me, I will happily absorb it like a sponge. I think I would have made a really good old technophobe, but life today requires so much technology. You wouldn't believe the stuff that you have to learn just to get along in the world. And my kids still run circles around me, technology-wise. My 10-year-old can show me stuff. No, Dad, let me show you. This is how you get the iPad to do this, and then I just have to sit back and, okay, thank you. Glad you were paying attention. I think I'm savvy, but when it comes right down to it, my kids prove to me every day, nah, you're not that savvy. Such is my life. Perhaps this is why, in my spare time, when nothing is pressing on me, I cook with fire. Because I'm probably more suited to be a caveman. A somewhat erudite caveman, but a caveman nonetheless. All right. We'll finish up this arc of history, and then I'm going to tell you about this family who got crosswise with the Mayo Clinic. And that's probably a whole show in and of itself, but wow.
Call us at 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or check us out online at libertyhealthshare.org. That's libertyhealthshare.org.
Welcome back to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. No Mo today, no Patrick today. But I am taking your calls, should you feel the urge. 801-254-1640. Talk a little bit about civility, and does the arc of history bend towards justice or madness? Now, we had a great quote from Erasmus, the great Renaissance thinker. If one of your comrades unknowingly gives offense, tell him so alone and say it kindly. That is civility. But in today's society, the article says, conscientious people's livelihoods are deliberately destroyed because they unknowingly give others offense, even when they were only doing their jobs. For instance, a progressive bakery in Oregon fired 2 of its employees after they followed the bakery's own policy by declining to serve a woman who came into the bakery after it had already closed. Because the woman in question was black and took offense based on the erroneous assumption that it was only due to her race, well, it became a big deal. And the company ended up having to fire 2 of their employees. As journalist Andy Nago noted, he said the woman was a professional equity activist. She took out her video camera, she started filming, and claimed, "Look, I am a victim of racism." As the TV station reported in a statement, the bakery said that although the 2 employees were following protocol, and they do not consider those 2 employees to be racist, they were fired because sometimes impact outweighs intent. By the way, that's the second time today I've seen that. Your intent, however good it may be, still doesn't change the fact that it may impact people. Putting this into more modern parlance, you're still going to end up triggering people whether you meant to or not. The bakery also said in a statement that the way the employees approached denying the woman service lacked sensitivity and understanding of the racial implications at work. The 2 employees were fired because the woman and the clamoring public demanded that they be fired. The bakery said in the statement, this sort of scapegoating of employees doing their jobs is the very opposite of civility and decency. The part that really jumps out at me is the part where it says the way that they approached the woman and denying her service because they were closed lacked sensitivity and understanding of the racial implications at work. And I'm going to go ahead and stick my neck out here and, feel free to chop away if need be. Is it possible that they didn't understand the racial implications and perhaps seem to lack sensitivity because they themselves don't view race as the most important factor in any human interaction that ever takes place? Just a thought. I love what a friend of mine said yesterday. In fact, I'm going to pull this up because I want to make sure I quote this accurately. I thought that he had just nailed it. My friend Andy said, "We are all racists when we obsess over race, and the liberal media promotes that obsession. We will stop being racist when skin tone and race is noticed with the same level of importance, and yes, even preference, as hair color, gender, body type, or the car that you drive." That makes sense. I mean, to me, that makes sense. When I'm talking to people or I'm interacting with people, that is not the primary consideration in my mind. Is, okay, what is this person's race and what are the possible racial implications of what I'm doing here? I don't have time for that. My concern is much more simpler, and it just boils down to the golden rule. So in virtually any human interaction that I'm going to have, the overriding concern that I have is, am I treating this person the way that I would want to be treated? And if I can answer yes to that, then I feel like I'm on pretty safe ground. I mean, not to oversimplify it to the point that, well, I'm writing this in crayon for you. Don't the basic tenets of every major religion in the world come down to treat others the way that you would want to be treated? That's how I have seen it. And I think if we followed the golden rule, whether you believe it came from the words of Jesus or whether you believe it is just a rule that makes a lot of sense, I haven't seen very many people go wrong with that treating others the way that they want to be treated. Tells me there may be something to it. But more often than not, when a big hoo-ha breaks out over, well, this person didn't show the requisite sensitivity, it really comes down to someone was there with the mindset of, somehow this makes me a victim. And it's not for the purpose of oh, wow, that hurt my feelings. It's more like, how can I gain power over you or over them or over others by playing the victim? That's not how adults should do stuff. 801-254-1640. Caller, welcome to Loving Liberty.
He's kind of as frustrated out of it as I do. I mean, I watched this media. Late last night, I sat down for 5 minutes, but 60 minutes came on. And the local media are not, or the mainstream media is so biased against this administration. And then, like, that's 3/4 of the show. And then you have Oprah Winfrey, publicizing, the lynches. All the lynches that went down. I guess there's a new memorial now on lynching. All the people that were lynched in the history of this country. And, it just seems like she's constantly stirring the pot, that woman, of the same issues. I guess you're never going to change these people that are the way they are. And I'm talking on both sides of the aisle. There's racism
Agreed.
in blacks, there's racism in white supremacy, there's racism in Muslims, and there's good apples and there's bad apples in every bushel. And you're always going to have it. And when you keep bringing up the subject and constantly stirring the pot, then that gives these individuals that are warped, where their brains are warped, ammunition. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Let me see if I can restate it in a more offensive way. The best people that I know aren't constantly looking to be seen as victims.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, you're right. Exactly. You nailed it right on the head. And I just wish these people in the mainstream media would stop stirring the pot on this, because it's either they just have nothing to talk about and they need something to fuel their, give them some self-worth or something. I don't get it, but it's frustrating to watch.
It serves.
Thanks for letting me vent.
Okay, thank you. No, at any time. That is why I'm here. If there's a spleen that needs venting, this is where you do it. 801-254-1640. It is frustrating, though, because the media is among those. Politicians join in here. Activists join in. They fan those flames of discord and division. And maybe I'm wrong. The slant that I have on it is, it's classic divide and conquer. As long as we are being divided up into little tribes who are always pitted against each other in this, eternal power struggle for who's going to dominate whom, we tend to forget where the real problems are originating. And it's from people in power who are doing their very best to either control us in everything we do, say, think, eat, wear, drive, or so forth, and who are also doing their best to fleece us of whatever they can. I know, I'm painting with a broad brush. Politics is I can't remember the name of the philosopher who said this, but politics is simply systems of organized hatred. It's tribalism, and tribes fight each other. Think about the people that you know in your life, the people who have, who bring out the best in you. And I don't mean, the ones who just tell you what you want to hear and stroke your ego, but the people who, when you're around them, the way they treat you, the way that they view you, helps you to see yourself in a better light than you might otherwise. Not that they're shaming you into being a better person, but they love you in such a way that you earnestly and sincerely feel like, no, I want to live up to their expectations. We had a sweet little lady in my neighborhood where I moved away from a little over a year ago. Sister Banks. That's how I'll introduce you to her. The kindest, sweetest little lady. And when I lived there in her neighborhood, I believed this. I believe it now, even though I don't get to see her. But I want to be the kind of person that Sister Banks apparently thinks that I am. Because she's that kind. And the way she loves people motivates me to want to step my game up and actually be the kind of person she seems to think I am. This is Loving Liberty. We'll be back right after this.
The sun's finally out, so get out there and enjoy. And don't forget to bring along the refreshing sound of K-Talk Media, 1640 AM.
Peace Legal. We're a refreshingly different type of law firm. Other law firms...
I'm going to mention this on the air when we come back here, but I've got two phenomenal guests joining me tomorrow. In fact, let me just clarify the time here because I want to make sure. Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. Fantastic automotive writer if you're into cars. And he's also a great freedom writer. We're going to talk a little bit about the banning of Alex Jones and what that portends. How it can possibly affect those of us who aren't Alex Jones, and maybe those of us who don't even have any kind of a broadcast platform. He's got a really great slant. Also, second half of the show tomorrow, we're going to talk with Eric Parker. Eric Parker is probably the most iconic image that came out of the Bunkerville situation back in 2014. If you've seen the photograph of the guy lying down on the ground with his rifle pointed through the Jersey barrier when the standoff actually occurred there at the gates to the BLM corrals, that was Eric. And he was sentenced last week. I believe the sentence came down to a year of supervised probation on a misdemeanor charge. Now you got to remember, people who saw that image said this guy is so screwed. He will never see the light of day. Once the feds get their hands on him, he will be buried under the prison. Nope. They put him on trial. There was a mistrial, and I believe they did a second run at it. They retried it, and the jurors just flat out said, not guilty. There were 2 counts that they hung on, and they were relatively minor things, but the feds came back to him and said, okay, will you take a misdemeanor plea to interfering with a federal agent or interfering with a federal officer? And he took it. So he is not a convicted felon. He is just going to do a year of supervised probation. Scott Drexler, who was also sentenced that same day, was given unsupervised probation, and I think they both got credit for time served. So neither one of them goes back to jail. They are both free men. But here's the important thing, because I don't want you to think we're just gloating here. You got to hear Eric's story from his own lips. Why did he go there in the first place? It's powerful, and it's something I think we could all learn from. All right, here we go. Welcome back to Loving Liberty. So glad you could join us today. 801-254-1640 is the number. Quick tease for tomorrow's show. I have 2 stellar guests who are going to join me, and I want you to make sure that whatever you're doing during this time tomorrow, tune in. You're going to hear Eric Peters. We're going to talk a little bit about why silencing Alex Jones may have some people cheering, but to people who understand the principles that are at stake here, not Alex Jones principles, there are other principles that apply, are looking at this and going, ooh, that's a bad precedent to see happening. Eric Peters in the first half of the show. Eric Parker, who was at the Bunkerville standoff back in 2014, he and Scott Drexler both sentenced last week. I think Scott Drexler got unsupervised probation and credit for time served. Eric ended up with a year of supervised probation. He has a remarkable story to tell. So if you just have thought of him as a radical, the guy with the gun sitting there on the overpass, you need to hear his story. You need to understand why he was there in the first place. And he'll have a chance to share that with us. That'll be at 1:30 tomorrow afternoon. Okay, so when you go to the doctor, obviously you want to trust medical professionals. You want to talk about somebody who holds your life in their hands. And I think for the most part, most doctors are the epitome of ethics. They believe that Hippocratic oath. They live up to it. They conduct themselves in a very professional manner, and they do an immense amount of good in the world. Every so often, though, there comes a place where the power of the state overlaps into medicine, and it just creates some incredible havoc. I'm going to share with you the example of a family in Minnesota whose daughter was 18 years old and who suffered from a brain aneurysm on Christmas Day. So she had some pretty serious life-threatening conditions. They ended up taking her to the hospital. They took her to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and there she was receiving treatment. But there came a point where her mom and some of the doctors who were caring for her were disagreeing on things. Mom's saying, I want to get a second opinion on this. And this happens occasionally. You've heard the old joke, what's the difference between a doctor and God? God doesn't think he's a doctor. And there's some truth to this, that sometimes egos get involved. Well, it got bad enough that the mom was banned from the hospital premises, and the physicians who were caring for this young lady said, well, because of her brain surgery and because of her mental condition following this aneurysm, she couldn't make her own medical decisions, even though she was over 18 years of age. And it came to the point where the family felt that they were not being given any say in the matter. They asked, could we please at least speak to a patient advocate? And they were told there is no advocate. They tried to talk to the doctor, and the doctor just walked away from them. And eventually they got a hold of someone who was actually on the board for the Mayo Clinic, who reached out and said, hey, can we please get control of this before it blows up in our faces? Too late. So the parents are told, you can't even, be on these premises, you can't come here. Well, they were concerned enough about their daughter that they created a ruse and said, hey, your great-grandma is coming. She would like to say hi to you. And so they arranged to have the daughter wheelchaired out, to the front of the hospital where she could meet her great-grandma. Well, they get to the front of the hospital, the waiting area there. There's no great-grandma. So they said, no, she's waiting outside in the truck. And her parents then had her wheeled out to the truck where it was very clear there is no great-grandma here. They put their daughter in the truck. Nurses came running. You can't take her. You can't take her. Well, they did. Let go of our daughter. They took her and they took off. That's when a 911 call was made. And the facility, the Mayo Clinic, accused the parents of a medical kidnapping. Now, the clinic was holding this girl against her will. And they were saying in the fine print of the papers you signed, you agreed that you would do whatever we tell you to do. So the parents ended up fleeing. Police were pinging their cell phone. They were reaching out to them and telling them, look, you got to come back. The doctors are saying that this girl is in great danger of dying. They're calling it a medical kidnapping. By the way, those of you who are flashing back to the Parker Jensen case from about 13, 14 years ago in Utah. Yeah. Asked for a second opinion. The doctor got upset and declared that when the parents took the child out of the hospital, in fact, when they took him out of state, the state of Utah actually filed kidnapping charges. Scary stuff. Well, in this case, the young girl, her and her parents ended up fleeing to South Dakota, where they found a non-Mayo affiliated hospital, and they had her examined by a couple of doctors who said no. She, couple of different drug prescriptions for her, and a couple of days of working with her, and they signed off on releasing her to go home. And to their credit, the police at that point backed off and said, if she's been released by medical professionals, then there's no reason that we should do this. Now, the Mayo Clinic, says, well, we can't comment on this, patient confidentiality and so forth. The family said, hey, we'll sign a waiver. We'll sign a release, and you can tell your side. They won't do it. Now, I'm not trying to tar all medical professionals, nor am I trying to tar the Mayo Clinic and say, they ought to just bulldoze that place for all the good it's doing. I'm sure it does a tremendous amount of good. But the question that I have for you, how do we keep medicine from being further co-opted by the state? I mean, this is not the first time. It happened in New Jersey. I was reading of an incident where a dentist, of all people, wasn't very happy that he had given some counsel to a family that was seeing him. Their kids were patients, and they didn't like what he was recommending. So they said, you know what? Thanks, but we're going to go get a second opinion. And it made this dentist angry enough. He did the nuclear option. He got Child Protective Services involved. Now, I don't know if you have ever experienced what it's like when someone says, by the way, Child Protective Services was here earlier asking about you. But when they enter the picture, it can be a very frightening experience. And I understand, please, I know there are times where Child Protective Services has to act on the welfare of a child. There are also times when they can get inserted into a situation, and once they are a part of that situation, you are not in control. I'll tell you what, years ago, when one of our kids was really small, one of our neighbors stopped by, and my wife was at work. I think I was at work. The older kids were babysitting, but they were not doing the greatest job of monitoring the kids. And so when this neighbor stopped by, here was our toddler standing in his high chair covered in cake or whatever he'd been eating. And this neighbor, being concerned, said, She went to our ecclesiastical leader and said, I'm thinking of maybe calling the Child Protective Services office. because I'm worried that these kids are being neglected. Thankfully, that ecclesiastical leader came to us and just said, look, nobody's called DCFS, but I thought you should know someone had a concern and expressed that concern to me, and I asked them, please let me talk to, the Hydes first, and they did. And but the chill that went up my spine when he said that they were wanting to call DCFS, I was like, wow. Now, I'm not saying that we were the perfect parents and our kids never ever got in any kind of trouble, but we certainly weren't being neglectful either. It was just the prospect of, oh boy, here comes the state into our lives to force a solution. It can be a really ugly thing. And sometimes it inadvertently drags people in there who have no business being a part of the system. Now, going back to the idea of this medical situation where doctors are saying this is the way it has to be, and they have some pretty serious authority. There are laws that will allow them to have someone involuntarily put into a medical watch or held for medical reasons. Where did we go wrong here? Look, it's no secret that healthcare and government have been slowly kind of bumping up against each other for some time. If you want to know why it's so dang expensive, that's one of the reasons why. But the expense pales to me in comparison to the danger of allowing medical personnel to hold on to a patient, especially somebody who is of legal age, as if they are, an inmate? Something like that? To ban the parents because, you're not agreeing with us and we don't want to hear what you have to say? Once you get the police involved, it becomes a much more serious thing. Although I got to give credit to the police in Minneapolis who wisely backed off once a doctor had told him, look, not only is this girl okay to be released, but she's okay. She's mentally competent to sign her own, medical decision papers, and so she did. But can you see how easily that would go wrong? So how do you choose a healthcare provider without getting stuck in that tar pit of bureaucracy? I don't have the answer. I'm asking the question, and I hope that you don't have to face those kinds of medical situations or medical emergencies where a decision like that is going to come into play. But nobody ever plans on it. Nobody ever thinks it's going to be us. We're going to be the ones at the hospital with our daughter suffering from an aneurysm, and we're going to find ourselves crosswise with the doctors and have the police actively hunting for us. It just seems like it's the kind of situation where it might be best to have those questions answered as far ahead of time as possible. Whether that's how you pick your physician or just, hey, what's our contingency plan in case somehow we need to get our kids to a safe house. I know, it sounds conspiratorial, but that's the times we live in. There's got to be a way to get this back onto a better course. I'll be thinking about it. Maybe you should too. See you back here tomorrow for Loving Liberty.